This is part 2 of a video. The title is Homosexuality is a Learned Condition, Self-Taught. Now let's review part 1 real briefly. Okay, St. Thomas Aquinas, his definition of beauty is that which gives you pleasure when you look at it. What I did was turn things around, and I say that if you're receiving pleasure at the time that you are looking at something, that tends to make what you're looking at look beautiful or approach beautiful. Then I went on and I was talking about if you're stimulating yourself, you sexually, the pleasure you receive if you're looking at your anatomy at that same time, the pleasure will make you, you'll be looking at it through rose-colored glasses, and it will, the pleasure will make it look beautiful to you. And this time, but now the second part video, I want to bring in the subject of liking and loving. Now, if you receive pleasure from something, the natural tendency is to like that thing. But if you receive more pleasure, at some point you go from liking to loving. You say, I love such and such. Now, what my point is that pleasure can produce the effect or illusion of beauty, but also create the feeling of liking or loving. In part 2, I want to go over Pavlov's dog. Ivan Pavlov was a Russian physiologist, and he studied the behavior of dogs and so on. Pavlov would ring a bell at the same time that he fed his dog. And the first time, the second time, third time, no real effect. But over time, the mind of the dog or the brain of the dog would link the ringing of the bell, the hearing of the bell, with the pleasure that the dog received in terms of eating. The dog would equate the sound with the pleasure that occurred at the same time. And I'm doing the same thing with sight. I'm saying that if you see something at the same time that you are receiving pleasure, it is natural or logical or to connect the sight with the pleasure, and so over time, just seeing the sight will give you some of the pleasure. That's what happened with Pavlov's dog. Pavlov rang the bell so many times, so often, when he would feed the dog, that when he stopped feeding the dog, when he would simply ring the bell, the dog anticipated the pleasure. And so hearing evoked the beginning of the pleasure. In other words, the beginning of the eating, of consuming, in terms of the salivating. I want to put the whole thing in terms of arousal. The dog heard the bell, heard the sound, and in his brain, through his linking of the sound with the pleasure of eating, there was the arousal that he would get by eating. That started without the eating, without the stimulus. The ringing of the bell became semi-equatable. He equated the ringing of the bell with the pleasure. And now what I'm doing is I'm saying that if you see your organ at the same time that you're receiving stimulation, just seeing the organ by itself will create the beginning of that arousal. And not only when it's your own organ, but when you see the organ of someone else, or even when you're seeing that organ of someone else in your mind. So you will get this arousal, or the beginning of arousal. And you'll say, "Oh, why am I aroused by this organ? I must be homosexual." And then you'll say, "Oh, it must be my genes. I must have homosexual genes." I want to say right now, no, wrong. It's not your genes. It's the fact that you've linked the site of this organ with the pleasure that you get through self-arousal. And you basically taught yourself to get aroused. And this confirms my thesis, which is that homosexuality is a learned response. You condition yourself through masturbating in a certain way. It has to be self-centered masturbation. You have to focus on yourself. One way to do that is through the use of mirrors. And it's basically the same thing as the story of Narcissus in Greek mythology. I could restate what I said just for the sake of emphasis, but I want to keep this particular video short in the hope that the shorter it is, the more likely YouTube is to record the hits, and so people will be more likely to finish viewing the video. I want the viewers of this video to make an effort to think about Pavlov's dog and the connection between the hearing of the bell and the arousal that the dog received. And it was through the timing element. The timing is the key ingredient here. Because the two were done together, the linkage was made. And I'm saying that the same thing with masturbation. If you're viewing the anatomy at the same time that you're stimulating yourself, it's logical to assume that there will be a linkage in your brain or in your mind. And so the mind will associate the image and with the pleasure. And so you'll get this arousal. But it's not just with your own organ. It's whenever you see the organ, and even if you only see the organ in your mind. So my point is you are training yourself to get aroused with the same sex organ when you probably don't want that effect. And so I'm trying to get you to understand that you are teaching yourself to think in these terms to get this arousal. And if you don't want the arousal, well, you shouldn't tie these two things together. And I'm going to keep this thing short. I'm going to close it off now at 10 minutes. I'm going to write out a summary or a transcript in the description box under the video, so please make a copy of that if possible. And also one more thing, I'm asking you to make a comment, and it can be a negative comment. I don't mind negative comments, but I would like comments of any kind.